Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Batra. We are up to Perek Bet Mishna Yud Aleph. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria Ben Svetlana Ranbai Veliyahu Ben Burcha Israelov Chana Ben Miriam Sason Ben Ryan Yoshua Ben Shifra Menuchatam Began Eden Amen and Le'avdi Ben Chaim Lechaim V'Derefua Shelemav Daniel Shalom Ben Rosa B'tor Shachol Israel and Dachlama Merav Binyamin Or Tzion Chai Ben Dvorah. The rest of the Mishnayot in this chapter deal with restrictions on planting trees. Mishnah 7 taught that trees may not be planted near the entrance to a city because they destroy the beauty of the city. Here the Mishnah addresses a different problem, the fact that the roots of a tree planted too close to the edge of one's property will spread as the tree grows and can eventually damage the pit of a neighbor. One must distance a tree 25 amot from the pit of his neighbor so that the tree's roots will not damage the pit. The roots of a fully grown tree will extend up to 25 amot from its trunk. A tree must therefore be planted at least that far from a pit that has been dug by a neighbor. And in the case of a carob or sycamore tree, he must distance them at least 50 amot from the pit, because these types of trees have longer root systems that can extend up to 50 amot from their trunks. Ben milmala, ben minatzad. These rules apply whether the tree or the pit is higher than the other, or whether they are side by side at the same level. If the base of the tree is higher than or level with the pit, the roots of the tree can grow into the pit itself and make it unusable. And if the tree is lower, so that the roots will spread underneath the pit, they can break up the soil and ruin the pit's floor. As the Gemara says on page 25b in Masechet Bava. Earlier in the chapter, in Mishnah 7, we learned that if a tree is illegally planted too close to a city entrance, it must be removed and no compensation is given to its owner. The Mishnah explains that in this case the law is different. If the pit was dug before the tree was planted and the owner of the tree planted it too close to the pit, within 25 or 50 amot, the owner of the tree must cut it down, but the neighbor must pay him for the tree. Although the tree was planted illegally, its owner did not cause damage when he planted it, because it takes many years for the roots to grow into the neighbor's property. Therefore, although the sages required him to remove the tree, they did not require him to do so without being paid. Mishnah 7 stated that one who plants a tree too close to a city entrance must cut down the tree and he has no right to be paid, since in that case the harm is being done to the public. The penalty is more severe than in this case, where the damage is being caused to an individual neighbor, and the hazards listed in the previous Mishnayot, such as olive pulp placed too close to a wall or cress planted too close to onions, must be removed without compensation, because they begin doing damage soon after they are put in place, unlike a tree. But if the tree was planted before the pit was dug, lo yakots, he does not even have to cut down the tree because it was planted permissibly. However, the neighbor may cut away any roots that are in his way, because removing a few roots will not harm the tree. Safek zekadam, if there is a doubt whether this one was first or that one was first, lo yakots, he also does not have to cut down the tree. Since the tree must be cut down only if it was planted after the pit was dug, and it is not clear that this was the case, the burden of proof is on the owner of the pit. Unless he can prove that the tree was planted illegally, he cannot force its owner to cut it down. This law also differs from that which applies to a tree planted near a city, as we spoke about in Mishnah 7. Another Tana disagrees with these laws. Rabbi Yossi, however, says, Afal pisha bo kodem elaylan, even if the pit was dug before the tree was planted, lo yakots, the owner does not have to cut down the tree. For this one digs the pit in his own property, and this one plants in his own property. According to Rabbi Yossi, it is always permitted to plant a tree close to the edge of one's property, because the roots will not grow into the neighbor's property for a long time. Like we discussed in the previous Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that one is required to distance a hazard from his neighbor only if it will cause damage actively and immediately. Regarding a tree, this is certainly not the case, for the roots take many years to grow. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi holds that as long as one is planting the tree in his own property, is permitted to do so, even if the neighbor already has a pit in place that will eventually be harmed by the roots. Rabbi Yossi agrees, however, that the neighbor can remove the roots when they become a problem. And the Rav does tell us, v'halacha ki Rabbi Yossi, the Rav follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And that is then of Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph, Mishnah Yud Bet teaches more restrictions that apply to someone who wishes to plant a tree near his neighbor's property. The 25 amot distance required in the previous Mishnah applies to a tree that is being planted near a pit. Here, no pit is present. The only problem is that the tree is being planted near a neighbor's grain field or orchard. Lo yita adam ilan samuk lizdeh chavero. A person may not plant a tree near the grain field of his friend, elim ken echik memenu arba amot, unless he distances it 4 amot from the field, so he will not enter his neighbor's property when tending his tree. It was standard practice in those times to plow the ground around trees or grapevines in order to loosen the soil in which the roots were growing. If a tree is planted too close to a neighbor's field, a person plowing the ground around his tree might trespass upon his neighbor's property when turning his plow around. The sages therefore required a person to plant his tree 4 amot away from his neighbor's property, so he will remain on his own land and not enter his neighbor's land. Even Rabbi Yossi, who does not require a person to distance his tree from his neighbor's pit, as the previous Mishnah taught, agrees with this restriction, because one who enters his neighbor's property without permission is damaging him, and this damage is active and immediate. Echad gifanim ve'echad kolilan. This law applies whether he is planting grapevines or any other type of tree. Both trees and grapevines must be distanced 4 amot from neighboring grain fields or orchards. Hayat gadel b'intayim. If, however, there was a fence between the two properties, this person may plant next to the fence on this side, and that person may plant next to the fence on that side. Even though the tree or vine will be very close to the field, this is permitted because the fence will prevent him from entering his neighbor's property. We are not worried that the fence will collapse. Now, as taught in the previous Mishnah, a tree's roots can extend up to 25 amot from its trunk. The Mishnah now discusses what a neighbor may do to remove roots of a neighbor's tree that spreads into his property. If roots of a tree planted near the boundary extend into the property of a neighbor, he may cut them to a depth of 3 tvachim, so they will not block the progress of his plow. The neighbor may cut out any roots that are within 3 tvachim of ground level, so that when he plows his field, his plow will not snag on the roots. The blade of a plow goes only 3 tvachim into the ground, so he may not remove roots that lie deeper than this unless he is digging a pit, as in the Mishnah's next case. He does not need to be afraid that he will damage his neighbor's tree by cutting these roots, and he has the right to remove them since they are in his property. And if he was digging pits, ditches, or vaults in his land, he may cut away the roots as he digs down. Someone digging pits or ditches goes deeper than 3 tvachim, and therefore he may remove and keep even roots that are more than 3 tvachim beneath the surface. And the wood is his to keep in both of these cases, since it grew in his property. However, he may keep only the parts of the roots that are more than 16 amot away from the trunk of the tree. Those parts do not provide nourishment to the tree. They are therefore viewed as mere wood, which belongs to the owner of the land in which they grew. The parts that are within 16 amot of the trunk, by contrast, are considered part of the tree, since the tree derives its nourishment through them. Therefore, although he may cut them if they are in his way, they are not his, and he must return them to the owner of the tree. And that is an Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.